There are moments in history when silence speaks louder than any verdict, and this was one of those. In a darkened Utah courtroom, the Browns sat side by side, waiting for what they hoped would be their day of justice. No cameras were allowed that day, just the rustling of papers and the weight of judgment on their shoulders after all these years. Cody's eyes bounced between his wives, Christine, Janelle, Meri, and Robyn, all holding the same hope that finally a court would recognize their family as legal, not criminal. But when the judge began to read, that hope started to crumble. One sentence changed everything. This was a case they thought they'd won, which now would be erased, not because they were wrong, but because the system said they didn't exist enough to fight. And in that moment, a victory turned to dust. But why did the court erase their win? And what does that mean for the Brown family today? When polygamy is no longer a felony, but still far from free? What do you think? Was this justice served or justice denied? Let me know in the comments before we uncover what really happened next. The courtroom seemed heavier than it usually did that morning. Even the walls knew that more than a verdict was about to be decided. The air was still, heavy with tension, with the faint scent of old paper and floor polish. The judge hadn't entered yet, but every seat was filled. Kody Brown sat at the table in a dark suit that looked borrowed from a past life, the life where he was still the proud patriarch of a family that defied convention. Beside him sat Robyn, trying to appear calm, though her eyes betrayed a quiet fear. Across the aisle, Christine and Janelle whispered to each other, their voices low, almost reverent. Meri, as always, sat apart, her expression unreadable, like someone watching the end of a dream she already knew was lost. This was Brown v. Buhman, the lawsuit that once garnered national headlines across America. The Browns had sued the state of Utah back in Arsenling Isher for criminalizing their plural family. They said it was a violation of their constitutional rights. At that time, it wasn't just a case. It was a statement, a defiance, a plea for recognition. They lived for years under threat of prosecution. All it took was one phone call, one complaint, and the police could have raided their home. Instead of hiding, they fought back to say, "We're not criminals, we're a family." It felt like victory when the case was first decided. The court had ruled in their favor, striking down parts of Utah's anti-polygamy law. Fans cheered, the headlines praised them, and for the first time, Kody felt the law had finally listened. What the Browns didn't know, however, was far from the real battle. Because sometimes in court, a win isn't the end, it's the setup for the fall. Christine still recalls that feeling walking out of the courthouse in Arsenling Isher, holding her children's hands, smiling for cameras. The sun was blinding, but it felt like freedom. For once, the world wasn't pointing fingers, it was watching history. But history has this nasty habit of erasing victories that come too early. 2 years later, the state of Utah appealed. They didn't argue that polygamy was moral or immoral. They argued something far colder, that the Browns no longer had the right to be in court at all. The reason? After filing the lawsuit, the Browns had quietly moved to Nevada, away from Utah's jurisdiction, away from danger, away from what they thought was persecution. That move would become the technicality that destroyed everything. And their lawyer tried to explain it gently. "The court says you don't have standing anymore," he told them. "Standing?" Kody repeated, his eyebrows furrowing. "We stood up. We risked everything. How do we not have standing?" The lawyer sighed and tapped a finger against the thick stack of filing. "Because you left. You're no longer under the law you're challenging." To the Browns, it made no sense at all. The scars were still fresh, the fear still real. But to the court, that wasn't enough. The legal system doesn't measure fear, it measures presence. And the Browns, technically speaking, weren't there anymore. Yes, it was like watching your house burn down and being told, "You can't call it yours because you moved next door." Such a final appeal would strip away more than just a ruling, but strip away legacy. What began as a fight for recognition ended as a quiet deletion from history. Meri once said, "It's strange. We changed the law for a moment, and then the law changed us forever." Back in the courtroom, several years later, as reporters flipped through their notes, that truth hung unspoken. What was What was once a proud family had become a fractured memory. But behind the silence, something else was stirring, because not all files stay closed forever. The judge entered with robe flowing, face unreadable. Cameras clicked, the air shifted. No. And then came the words that would set the tone for everything that followed. This case, Brown v. Buhman, is hereby dismissed. Sir, but why did the court erase a case that had already been won? And what did they not want the world to see buried in those sealed documents? Hank, when the judge's voice echoed through the courtroom, it didn't sound like justice. It was finality. Kody froze, his fingers clenching the table with such force that his knuckles turned white. Robyn's eyes shone with incredulity, while Janelle let out something in a whisper, almost indistinguishable. The room was silent, but for the soft scratch of reporter pens moving swiftly over notepads, chronicling the fall of a family that once believed it had changed the law. The loudest defeats sometimes come in absolute silence. The air was cold outside, the sky the color of slate. The steps in front of the courthouse seemed to go on forever as Christine walked down them, her heels against the stone, sounding like the echo of something she wanted to forget. Cameras were everywhere around her, microphones thrust forward, all asking a single question: how does it feel to lose? She didn't answer, just kept walking. Back in their rented SUV, Kody stared ahead without blinking. The once fiery patriarch, the man who had stood on national television and said, "I love my wives, and I'm not ashamed of it," Minus now looked like a man who didn't know where to go next. Robyn tried to console him, her voice trembling. "Kody, you did everything you could," she whispered. Kane. He didn't say anything, just clenched his jaw and flexed the muscles of his neck as he muttered, "They erased us. They didn't just dismiss the case, they dismissed us." The Browns' attorney, Thomas, had tried to prepare them for this. He'd warned that the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals wasn't focusing on morality or fairness, but on jurisdiction, a technical battlefield where emotion held no weight. The word standing had become the Browns' new enemy, as cold and unfeeling as the marble pillars outside the courthouse. Christine sat alone later that night, scrolling on her phone through old headlines, articles extolling them as the family that changed Utah. Each headline felt etched in stone now, like a lie. She whispered, "We didn't lose because we were wrong. We lost because they said we didn't exist." And that realization hurt more than any verdict ever could. The final dismissal came in, Artsenling Isherluk. It wasn't televised, no breaking news banners or press conferences, just a quiet update on a legal docket. Case dismissed for lack of standing. For years, the fans who had once celebrated their courage had no inkling that the decision had been reversed. In the public's mind, the Browns still were the family who beat the law. Only those closest to the case knew the truth. That victory had been rewritten quietly, legally, and completely. As Christine would later recall in an interview, "We fought a giant, and then the giant erased the battlefield." At the same time, fissures began to open inside of the family itself. The pressure of the costs of their defense, public censure, and conflicting allegiances eating away at the cohesion that once characterized them. Christine's patience thinned, Janelle withdrew into practicality, Meri's loneliness deepened, and Robyn's constant defense of Kody only made her a lightning rod for resentment. It had been as if the defeat at the courthouse infected their house, making dinner every night a silent trial in its own right. One night, Janelle confronted Kody. "You made us believe this fight would give us peace," she said softly. "But all it did was take everything we had left." And Kody slammed his hand against the table. "I fought for us." "Then why do we all feel like we lost you too?" she replied. Her words cut deeper than any judge's ruling, because sometimes losing a case is easier than losing a family. By Arsen Ling Ursers, Utah changed its polygamy law, downgrading it from a felony to an infraction, a move that came too late for the Browns' legacy. Reporters called it progress. Kody called it irony. "We fought for 10 years, he said bitterly, "and the law caught up the moment we stopped fighting." But whispers began to surface online. Questions about whether the Browns' old case could be revived under the new law. Could the family that once broke the mold now reopen the file that history tried to bury? It was the kind of idea that haunted Kody, who couldn't stop thinking about the sealed court files, the ones labeled as confidential, the ones nobody had ever seen. One night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, Kody opened his laptop, scrolled through an old folder, and stared at a single PDF titled Brown v. Buhman, full record, see lead. His finger hovered over it for a long moment before he whispered, "Oh, maybe it's time the world saw what they tried to hide." Elio, but what was buried in those sealed files? And why was Kody suddenly so desperate to open them now, after all these years? The screen of Cody's laptop shone dimly in the darkened room. The reflection showing in his tired eyes had gone to sleep. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the muffled ticking of the wall clock. He hesitated, then clicked the file. The document opened with black bars across whole paragraphs, redactions, legal signatures, stamped dates. But between the lines, words began to appear that he hadn't seen before. Private correspondence, sealed deposition, off-record testimony, May Ford testimony, Canuck. Cody's heart began to pound. There were names, officials, investigators, and even a reference to media coordination. Someone had leaked information long before the ruling ever came down. He scrolled down faster. Then he stopped. A line caught his eye. Keynote. In view of the plaintiffs relocating, prosecution remains suspended until the will of the people and network influences change. He whispered it out loud, tasting the bitterness of each word. Network influence, TLC. It hit him in a flash. What if the very show that made them so visible also made them vulnerable? The deeper he read, the more uneasy he grew. There were references to interviews given under duress, to surveillance reports that predated the lawsuit. It wasn't just a case about law, it was a case about exposure. The Browns had not just fought the state, they'd fought perception itself. Kody rubbed his temples. They never wanted justice, he said, his voice low. They wanted us as a warning, and for the first time, he realized the enemy wasn't just the courtroom, it was the spotlight. And the next morning, Christine found him at the kitchen table, his eyes bloodshot. "You didn't sleep," she said quietly. "I couldn't," Kody said, sliding the printed pages toward her. "Look at this. They mentioned TLC. They talked about controlling public opinion." Christine skimmed the lines, her face paling. "So, they used us?" "You citrus sesame, yes. They built us up so they could break us down," he said. Her hands shook as she folded the paper back up. "I told you, Kody, we weren't fighting for the law. We were fighting to prove we belonged. And now it looks like they wrote us out of history on purpose." Kody leaned back, eyes closing. "They called it a family experiment. Maybe we were just the experiment." Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free, it shows you how trapped you really are. Later that week, Kody made plans to meet their old attorney, Thomas, in a quiet Flagstaff cafe. The man looked older, thinner, but his eyes were still sharp. "I read the sealed record," Kody started. "You knew about the media influence, didn't you?" Thomas sighed. "I knew enough." The case had turned political the moment TLC entered the courtroom, even if not direct. They didn't want to appear soft on polygamy while the show was making money. "So, we were convenient?" "Collateral," Thomas corrected softly. "You won too soon. The system doesn't like being embarrassed." The weight of those words sank into Cody's chest. The victories, the speeches, the televised moments, it all led here. He looked out the window, voice trembling. "So we weren't dismissed for leaving Utah. We were dismissed because they needed us gone." Thomas nodded once. "That's how I read it." Kody stared at his reflection in the window. He didn't see that confident husband from season 1 anymore. He saw a man erased by the very system he tried to challenge. He whispered, "All that's left of us is paperwork." But paperwork has a way of resurfacing, especially when the people behind it still have something to hide. That night, Kody gathered his family. The sealed pages lay on the table like evidence in a crime no one could name. The wives sat in silence, each processing the same cold truth. Their story wasn't just forgotten, it was buried. Robyn was the first to speak. "If they hid this, what else did they hide?" Janelle shook her head. "Kody, if we open this up again, It's not just a case, it's a war. Christine's voice cracked. Maybe it's a war that should have been fought years ago. Kody looked at them, the weight of leadership pressing against his chest again. Then we finish what we started. Can. The room fell silent, except outside where thunder rolled across the desert. King. The day that file leaked, the internet caught fire. King. It all started with a single Reddit post entitled, "What TLC Didn't Want You to See, The Hidden Pages of Brown v. Buhman." Within hours, screenshots surfaced, blurred seals, fragments of deposition quotes, and names no one expected to read. First, the fans thought it was a hoax. Then the document number matched. The same sealed case file that had vanished in Arsène Ling Loop. Suddenly, this lawsuit, forgotten for almost a decade, was trending once again. Brown v. Buhman was trending everywhere across X, YouTube, and TikTok. And in the court of public opinion, the case was suddenly reopened. That Tiat, Christine was in her kitchen when her phone exploded with notifications. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages. One from a reporter read, "Christine, are you ready to comment on the newly released pages?" Kane. She stared at the screen, heart pounding. Her fingers trembled as she opened one of the leaked images, a section marked Exhibit B, Network Correspondence, Artsenling Sen, Ursen, Chen, Hattie. It was an email thread between state officials and a network executive discussing public reception risk if Brown's win case. Christine read the words twice. "Unable to breathe, Kody," she whispered, seizing her coat. "You need to see this. Yune." Across town, Kody sat in his truck in the driveway of his home, scrolling on his phone. His own face came up in clips from Season R, him saying proudly, "We have nothing to hide." Now, that line played over footage of the leaked documents, a cruel contrast. Kang. Robyn ran out of the house, tears streaking down her cheeks. "They're saying we were part of a deal. That TLC worked with them to keep us quiet." Kody shook his head furiously. No, that isn't true." Key. Robyn's voice broke. "But it looks true. Truth doesn't always destroy you. Sometimes it makes all others stop believing in you." Within days, major outlets picked up the story. CNN, People, TMZ. The word sealed deposition became part of the national conversation again. Legal analysts debated whether the leak violated privacy laws. Others questioned whether the Browns could refile under new Utah legislation. The family faced a different sort of trial in Flagstaff, one fought on social media. Old fans turned critics. Supporters demanded. Meri, who had remained largely silent since her split from Kody, finally spoke out in a single post. And sometimes justice doesn't fade, it waits. Her comments blew up. Dapalai, leak. Meanwhile, Christine met with an investigative journalist named Eliza, who claimed she could trace where the leak came from. They met in a small diner off Route Loop, both wearing hats and sunglasses, like fugitives from their own past. Yokang. Eliza slid a flash drive across the table. "I found something in the metadata," she said. "These files weren't leaked by accident. Someone inside the original case accessed them." Christine's eyes widened. "You mean someone from the court?" Eliza shook her head. "No, someone with production clearance." Christine leaned back, feeling the room tilt. "You're saying TLC knew?" Eliza didn't answer. She didn't have to. It wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. It was a cover-up. That night, Kody called an emergency family meeting. The tension was unbearable as Robyn wept openly, Janelle sat stone-faced, and Christine looked ready to explode. Kang. Kody slammed a folder onto the table. "They think we were part of it, that we let it happen." Kek. Janelle's voice was cold. "Maybe because we did nothing when it mattered most," Christine snapped. "We trusted the system. We thought if we followed the rules, they'd play fair." Kody glared at her. "And look where that got us." The room was filled with suffocating silence. Finally, Christine spoke up, her voice trembling, yet strong. "Then let's stop talking and start fighting again." "Yeah." Robyn looked horrified. "Christine, you can't. The show, the contracts, everything will blow up." Christine met her eyes. "It already has." Kang. Kody stared at the folder, now sealed, one last time before his whisper escaped him. "If this goes public, they'll destroy us." Christine stepped closer, defiance etched on her tone. "They already did. Now we show the world how." Lightning flashed outside, sending streaks of light across the room. like ghosts of their former selves, because the truth buried once was about to be unearthed for good. The rain didn't let up that morning. It fell over Flagstaff like the sky itself was tired of holding secrets. Reporters again camped outside the courthouse, microphones glinting, umbrellas crowding the steps. After nearly a decade, the name Brown v. Buhman was back on the docket. Inside, the benches were full. Kody sat in the front row beside Christine and Janelle. Robyn lingered behind them, quiet, nervous. Meri arrived last, her face unreadable, but her presence undeniable. When the judge came in, all rose. Cameras clicked, the sound like thunder after lightning. This time, the Browns weren't there as TV personality. They were there as people demanding to be seen. Kody exhaled slowly. "This isn't about winning anymore," he whispered. "It is about truth." Can't. The hearing was brief. No jury, no testimony, just arguments about whether the newly leaked files changed the meaning of the old case. Their attorney spoke first, voice steady. Your Honor, the dismissal in Arsene Lingy was based upon standing, yet these documents show state interference, outside influence that compromised that dismissal, and the Browns deserve to be heard again. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Brown, do you wish to speak?" Kody stood. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the entire room. "Your Honor, we're not here to relive the past. We're here because the truth was buried. All we ever wanted was the right to love without being treated like criminals. Maybe we weren't perfect, but we never lied." He looked over at Christine. She nodded slightly, a small silent truce after years of distance. Sometimes, closure doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from finally being heard. Okay? The judge did not render a decision that day. Instead, he announced that the case would be reviewed, not retried, but examined for procedural misconduct. For the first time in years, the Browns left the courthouse with a sliver of hope, not victory, in their hands. Outside, the crowd erupted with questions. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, but this time, Christine didn't hide. She stepped forward, lifted her head, and faced the lenses that once humiliated her. "We've been silent for too long," she said, her voice steady over the rain. "The truth is messy, but it's ours. The system tried to erase our story, and we're taking it back." Her words went viral across social media within hours of posting. Support flowed from unlikely quarters, former fans, legal experts, even libertarian defenders of personal freedom. Hashtags began to shift from "Punished Brown Scandal" to "Punish Brown Truth." Kody stood behind Christine, not as a husband reclaiming power, but as a man finally learning to share it. Because when history repeats itself, it doesn't always bring pain. Sometimes it brings redemption. That evening, the family once again gathered around the living room table, the same spot where the first lawsuit had been planned years earlier. The papers lay between them, the same ones once stamped SILED. Now, they were open. Janelle spoke in a hushed tone. "You think the court will actually listen this time?" Christine smiled weakly. "Maybe. But even if they don't, the world already has." Robyn wiped her eyes. "All these years, and it's the truth that finally brought us back together?" Meri looked at her then, her tone soft. "The truth, and the courage to face it." Kody leaned back and listened to his family talk. The same people he once feared losing. For the first time in a long time, he said nothing. Silence felt right. Outside, the rain let up. Clouds parted, only enough for light to spill across the desert hills, a land that once divided them. It didn't look like closure. It looked like continuation. The narrator's voice softened. There are cases that change systems and others that change hearts." They did not rewrite the law, but they reminded everyone that justice is not written on paper. It's in the choices we make. And perhaps, just perhaps, that decision will be listened to this time around. Now, dear people, what do you think? To continue the struggle for truth or to let the past finally rest? Write in comments, because justice is not only in courts, it's in what we remember and what we stand for. Lalia.